Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and it's really a pleasure to be here. Chicago just has so much going on in the clean energy entrepreneurship space, and it's great to see all this turnout here today. So we're going to be talking about something that's on a lot of people's minds across this country, and that is jobs, but in particular, clean energy jobs. And I think to dig into that, Governor, I wanted to ask you, why are you here? Your background is a lawyer. You did not come out of the energy industry. What was it that put you on a path to end up being a leader in the realm of clean job creation?
Well, actually, so as Nick suggested when he introduced me, Michigan was going through this enormous crisis, not just in the auto industry, but in the manufacturing sector overall. And so because of that crisis, in fact, I was mentioning to Julian that at the end of my first year in office, we lost this huge refrigerator factory that employed about 3,000 people in a little town of 8,000, Greenville, Michigan. And that loss, when we tried to put everything on the table to keep them there, it was operated by Electrolux, and they said to me, there is nothing you can do to keep jobs for this factory in the U.S. when we can pay $1.57 an hour in Juarez, Mexico. So when he said to me, there's nothing you can do, it made me think, oh my God, this isn't just Greenville. This is going to happen in community after community all across Michigan because of the ease with which these companies can choose to locate in play labor arbitrage essentially and locate in low-wage countries. So we had to figure out, what is it that we were going to branch into as a state? What sectors could we create industrial clusters around? So I had a big confab. I brought in, Brookings Institution. I brought in all these experts. We did a SWOT analysis on Michigan's economy, basically. What are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And where can we leverage our assets and take care of the legacy players as well? And so in that whole process, we learned that Michigan had unique assets, obviously in the advanced energy space, and that obviously was cars, right? We built car 1.0, we want to build car 2.0, and that meant the electric vehicle and the batteries for the electric vehicle. But it also meant that our wind resources, our water resources, that we have a huge amount of waste to energy opportunity. Unfortunately, we are the place where a lot of landfills exist, and so that technology was an opportunity for us as well. So I went on a rampage about what we were going to do policy-wise, what I was going to do as governor to attract foreign direct investment, what were we going to do to get on the map and create jobs for our people. It was all about good-paying jobs.
And in that point in time, I mean, electric cars were nowhere near what we're used to today. I mean, it's still just a tiny share of the vehicles on the road. How futuristic did this vision seem? How crazy or far off did it look?
Let's just say, I mean, we selected a number of different sectors, and energy, clean energy was one of them. And it was when the auto industry, well, first of all, before the auto industry went bankrupt,
which is another challenge you had to deal with.
Believe me, it's all part and parcel of the same thing, right? But before that, Delphi Automotive was the largest bankruptcy in history, and that was in Michigan as well. So all the suppliers went bankrupt essentially before the OEMs went bankrupt, and all of that meant that we had to do something different. So the batteries for the vehicle, for example, all of that came about in the wrapped around the crisis. So the Obama administration, we worked when they were just coming in, right? So you remember the crisis happened in 2008, 2009. The auto industry, at least Chrysler and Ford, Chrysler and GM went bankrupt. But during that, we were working with the Obama administration to make sure that we could get inside of the Recovery Act dollars for batteries and battery locations. So we went hard on that. We said we have got to be the place where batteries are built for our domestic auto industry. And so as a result of that Recovery Act money, Michigan ended up getting 12, or more than half of all of the grants for that. So we were able to really get a foothold in that particular space. But again, all of this, the genesis of all of this, was jobs. I mean, obviously climate change is super important, but when you have people who cannot put food on the table, who have had the rug pulled out from under them through no fault of their own, you know that you have got to get jobs to people. And as we were looking at the trajectory of growth in sectors, the huge uptick that was projected, both wind, solar, batteries, all of the technologies, we said this is where we're going to plant our flag.
And did that seem revolutionary, or was it a break with the past there, or did you see it as really a natural evolution of the strengths that existed already?
I mean, it was we put on steroids the natural evolution. So we wanted to accelerate that. Obviously, the auto industry was going to move into this, the electric vehicle space anyway. That was going to happen. But we just wanted to make sure that we had homegrown opportunities, batteries. So for example, LG Chem opened up a double factory in Holland, Michigan, and supplies now batteries for the OEMs in Michigan, which is great. But LG Chem also needed to have a supply chain, and so part of the strategy for developing jobs and an industrial cluster is to get the whole supply chain there when you don't have it, right? So we did a whole analysis on the globe. Who right now is selling reliable anode, cathode, electrolyte, separator material, et cetera, for the batteries? And so I went to Germany, I went to Japan, I went to South Korea, to try to get as many of those suppliers as possible so that we would have an industrial cluster that would end up creating jobs.
And what tools in the tool belt did you end up employing that were most effective in that? In particular, what might other governors look at and say, okay, I can do that and attract this kind of new business? Yeah,
I mean, clearly you've got for renewable energy generation, clearly you've got the policy tools associated with the renewable portfolio standard, et cetera. So we just started out with a super modest, 10%. Now on Friday, I'm so pleased to say that the two main utilities in Michigan just did a deal and announced that they were going to do 50% renewable by 2030, which is awesome. Awesome. So, there's just, right?
Yeah.
So you just got to get it started. And they realize, you know what? It's not as difficult. Consumers and Detroit Edison, it's just not as difficult as we thought. In fact, it seems like this is the way of the future. And so, all of this could have been happening anyway, clearly, but you want to be able to accelerate in order, again, in my case, to create jobs.
Now, a pattern I've seen in a lot of different places.
I didn't really answer your question, though.
Yeah,
Can I just say,
other tools.
So I mean, the RPS is a tool working with the Utility Commission already to have it part of their integrated resource planning is a tool. Tax incentives is clearly the biggest tool that governors have, but you can have strategic tax incentives. So, for example, we had an anchor credit that we awarded to Hemlock Semiconductor, which did polycrystalline silicon for the solar industry. And we said, if you recruit some of your suppliers, we'll give you a juice on your credit, so that they ended up being a recruitment arm for us. So that kind of trying to be creative about it, obviously providing a workforce that is trained, and so telling those that you're trying to recruit that we have attached you to a community college or some other training entity that is going to specifically do a training program that is just for you, or making sure that they know that we're recruiting a supply chain there, or that they certainly have customers there. So the OEMs, the car makers, they're customers, and we wanted to make sure that that folks knew that on the battery side anyway. So there's a whole slew of different policies. As a matter of fact, let me just do a plug for this. I am chair of this American Jobs Project. The Clean Energy Trust was a partner in our project here in Illinois. We identified in Illinois that you guys could be rock stars in utility scale storage, obviously with argon and a lot of the storage work that's already happening here. We list about 15 different specific policies. Some require legislative action, some just require leadership. But in every state, this American Jobs Project really goes to states that, unlike Illinois, Illinois has a Republican governor, but we like to go to the red states and to the purple states who really care about jobs. We don't even talk about climate. We're just saying, hey, if you guys want to create jobs, this sector is just exploding. Here is a SWOT analysis of your state. Here's an industrial cluster that you could create. Every state has something to offer in this clean energy space. Every state has got the opportunity to create jobs in it.
And how do you make sure you don't give away too much in that process? Because we've seen a lot of states have gone through the experience of really wooing a factory and millions of dollars in breaks, and then the jobs that were promised never materialize.
Funny, all you entrepreneurs, you get notches in your belt for how many times you've tried something and it hasn't worked. In the political space, you don't really get positive notches in your belt for recruiting something that doesn't work. But we really were trying everything that we possibly could. So we ended up failing a couple of times, or choosing a couple of folks that we ended up recruiting that it just didn't work out for. But the bottom line is, if you don't try it, you're not going to get it. And yes, you can give too much away, and you have to understand sort of where is the right balance. There is actually, I worry about this for states and localities. You've got Amazon that's doing their new headquarters, right? And it would be so great to see a company like Amazon go to an area that really needs that employment. And yet, a lot of times these companies come and ask for massive amounts of money, even though they're super wealthy companies and the place they're going doesn't have a whole lot of money to give. And so it's really frustrating. There's actually even a magazine called Site Selection Magazine, which gives governors some of you probably are aware of it. They do a governor's cup. And they award governors, you're the number one, you get the governor's cup if you've poached the most, jobs from another state or another place. So, we're totally competitive as governors. And I don't care if I go to Columbus and take Columbus's jobs if it comes to Michigan. It's not really a great national strategy.
Interesting. And speaking of national strategy, there isn't much of one right now for clean energy jobs. How does an administration in the White House that would rather save coal jobs make it harder, or make your job harder in advocating for these clean energy jobs? Or do you see federal backtracking on these kinds of goals compared to the Obama administration as a real problem here, or something that states and localities are equipped to deal with?
Well, it would be great to have national leadership, right? But we don't, so it's an opportunity. And this is why all of these state and local leaders that have raised their hand and said, I'm still in on Paris. So we have, there's over 2,500, mayors, governors, and private sector leaders and NGOs that are saying we are determined. So there's a little bit of that has been juiced, I think, by the pullback on the federal government. And I think people feel like this is a temporary pause on federal leadership, so therefore the states and locals are going to step up. And I wish this were more the case in some of the tougher areas of the country where they haven't even adopted renewable portfolio standards, for example. Mm-hmm. But this is why, to me, the emphasis on miners and on coal workers, I think we cannot lose sight of the human beings that are behind that. I mean, Donald Trump has something right in this, which is people have a livelihood, and for generations they may have worked at this place and have felt totally identified and connected. And if you diss that in some way, we've just got to be super careful about respecting the dignity of these workers and providing them an opportunity. They are somewhat of a proxy. The coal miners are somewhat of a proxy for those who are not ready to, at least the Trump column, I'll just say, is, speaking directly to the fear of those who feel like the world is leaving them behind. And it's a real fear. So we've got to be clear. This is why I'm so focused on jobs, that coal miner has to have an opportunity and see himself or herself in some way employed in this new space. And so this realm of clean energy creates all kinds of jobs for all kinds of people. And if, you know, maybe they're not going to go into software development, but you better believe there are plenty of jobs out there that could use a dedicated, honest, hardworking employee who just needs a little bit of training to, whether it's installing, you know, it's installing wind, installing solar. I mean, there's just a lot of opportunity, and we haven't been talking enough about that, I think.
Well, and on the topic of training, it feels like whenever politicians in Washington are talking about these massive changes in the economy and the kind of jobs that exist here, jobs training is the go-to solution to pretty much any problem there. And people have been talking about that for a few decades now as the factories shut down, and doesn't seem to have really worked on the grand scale. So have you seen jobs training programs that really, really nail it and really succeed? And what sets those apart from just this generic, we'll just train people and nothing happens?
Yeah, this is really the key question, right? Yeah, there are jobs training programs that work really well in Germany. We just don't, we have not gotten our act together on this yet. Now, so can I just tell just a quick story?
Sure.
So that Electrolux plant, I went to the employees, when they announced that the factory was closing down, the employees had this gathering that they called the Last Supper. It was this huge community grieving session, essentially. And I went to this, even though I was not invited, because I had failed to keep the factory there, right? But I went because it was such a defining moment for me that this factory was leaving and what it would mean and portend. And I went to this thing, and there was, you know, it was a big, in Clackhol's Orchard Pavilion, it was, you know, thousands of people. They were eating around 8 top tables out of box lunches. It was a sad band playing. And I go up to the, well, it was a band playing sad music, probably. It's kind of a sad band.
It's important to clarify.
But I go up to the first table, and this guy stands up. This is the worker. This is the worker we're talking about. He stands up. He's got his baseball cap on backwards. He's got tattoos. He says, "Governor," he says, "come here." And he says, "I want you to meet my 2 daughters." And he pulls his young teenage daughters next to him, and he says, "These girls have seen me work at this factory. I worked at this factory since I was 18 years old. I've been there for 30 years. I'm now 48 years old. My father worked at this factory. My grandfather worked at this factory. All I know," he said, "is how to make refrigerators." And then he looks at his girls, and he puts his hand on his chest like this. "So, Governor, tell me, who is ever going to hire me? Who is ever going to hire me?" That guy is the guy we've got to develop training programs for, right? So this motivated me when I was governor to go to the federal government and say, "Look, can you give us a blanket waiver on all of the Workforce Adjustment Act and the Workforce Investment Act and the Trade Adjustment Assistance Act? Can you give us a blanket waiver on your restrictions so that we can craft a training program that allows for me to address this guy?" Because this guy is not going to want to go sit in a community college next to a 21-year-old who, in a calc class, when he didn't even go to college to begin with and can't even remember how to do statistics. How do you do a training program that addresses him and gives him the dignity of being able to work and have on-the-job training? That on-the-job training was the piece that we didn't do, but we created something called No Worker Left Behind. And I stood up at the State of the State address, and I said, "All right, the first 100,000 workers who come in the door, we're going to pay for you to be retrained. We will pay for it. We will pay, you know, essentially $10,000. We'll give you $5,000 for 2 years if you agree to be trained in an area of need." And the area of need were the things that we were diversifying into, including clean energy. And we said, you can't go and get a degree in, you know, French or political science. Those were my degrees, so I could say that. You have to go get a degree in something that we need. But if you choose to do that, we will pay. We had 100,000 openings. We got oversubscribed, went back to the federal government. 200,000 people ended up being trained through this effort, and there was still more to be done. But my point on saying this is that specific training that leads to a specific career and a specific job is so much more powerful than just generalized training. What I would do now, if I could wave my magic wand, I would say that those people who are being trained need to be trained on the job, placed at a place, subsidize that training. Instead of subsidizing unemployment, let's subsidize employment and have them be trained on the job so they can literally see where the training is headed to. That on-the-job kind of training and specific, that is dignified, I think is something that we have to work on in Silicon Valley. I think could do a whole lot with this, with AI and machine learning and individualized training. So that's a really long answer, I'm sorry.
That's a fascinating story, though.
It's a key question that we need to be answering.
Well, and you know, if states start adopting that approach, do you think the numbers match up in terms of the number of jobs in coal or gas or even building the pipelines, building the infrastructure to transmit fossil fuels? Is there enough job potential in solar and batteries and electric cars to really fill that hole?
Well, I think that any state that is losing a major industry has to look at what their assets are and move into the sectors that they think they can be competitive in, right? So it may, but it's certainly a slice of it. We know that, I mean, Bloomberg New Energy, the IRENA report that came out from 2017 was projecting that there's going to be almost 30 million clean energy jobs globally by 2030. All right, 30 million jobs. And if we do nothing, they're all going to go somewhere else. And so the question for us is, are we able to compete? Are we going to allow China to have, 60% of the employment? We're talking about mobility. The Bloomberg report says that China will have 50% of the electric vehicles, 50% by 2025. That's a lot. And if we don't do anything policy-wise, states and cities can do something in the absence of the federal government, then we are going to just continue to allow all of that investment to go somewhere else. So I'm just saying, if the globe needs energy and they need these products and everybody's signed on to the Paris Accord except for us, all of those countries are your total, your addressable market. So why not consider that in terms of production in the U.S.?
Absolutely. And do you think that message can resonate or is resonating in the states where climate change is just not a top priority?
Yeah, I would say that the only way this gets addressed in states that have not seen climate change as a top priority is to focus on jobs. That's really the key way, right? So every year, Pew Charitable Trust comes out with the list of priorities in America in terms of what people want addressed. And every year at the top, it's jobs in the economy. And at the bottom, they have 30 things. And climate change is always 29 or 30 because people see it as polar bears and they see it as 40 years out, et cetera. So that language, as was suggested earlier too, is just, it's not the language to be able to get people to respond. Jobs is the way to get people to respond. I mean, Georgia is one of the states that we looked at. Georgia has got this incredible smart buildings cluster around Atlanta. And they see this, I mean, the Chamber of Commerce, all of the business community around Atlanta sees this as a huge opportunity. They're developing policy in response to the business community, asking them to. So, if they're going to have an efficiency standard in Georgia because the business community asks and it's because of business and jobs, that's the way to go. Don't talk about climate. Talk about the market opportunities, and we want products stamped made in America and sent somewhere else rather than having to import all those Chinese solar panels.
Absolutely. And how much do you think the electoral process plays into this? I mean, obviously, if you have legislators in power who aren't really interested in this stuff, you're going to need to bring in some new blood to really pass an RPS standard in a state that doesn't have that or something. But do you see clean energy jobs being a winning item in elections, or is it something that voters care enough about that it would serve candidates well to talk more about it?
Yes. Yeah, that's an easy one. I mean, they don't even have to call them clean energy jobs. Have a jobs agenda that includes these clean energy components that will get you jobs. I mean, our American Jobs Project, we project if you adopt these policies around this industrial cluster, here's the number of jobs that could be created. So somebody who's running for office, I don't care whether you're red or blue, you could say, hey, I'm putting this in my economic plan because it will create X number of jobs. That's really powerful for people. So yeah, and I do think, you know, I'm a Democrat, so I'm every day waking up getting angry about what I'm seeing. So I have decided I'm just taking on a new MO, which is I am not going to let myself get psychically upset. I am just going to mobilize. I want people to be elected who understand the importance of leadership in this area. If you can find Republicans who are doing that, God bless you, and I think we should elect them. But whatever that is, find your candidates who are committed to making this a priority, because without those voices in state legislatures, obviously without them in the governor's offices or the mayor's offices, you're not going to get them. But can I say the mayors, God bless them, many of them are really leading the way. I know we discussed that earlier today. Ryan was talking about it a bit in the Proterra discussion, but mayors have been very, very, they get it. They get it.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to open up to questions in a minute, but to close, I was curious what, you know, if you're looking across the country, you know, what states or what particular industrial clusters make you most hopeful for the future? And, you know, are there any like good cases you'd like to highlight so the rest of the country can learn from them?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I can highlight opportunities because that's what we focus on in our work. So, for example, North Carolina has the largest amount of poultry and hog waste of any state in the country. Anybody here from North Carolina? All right.
Great barbecue.
What an opportunity. That's a unique thing to have that much poop. So, but there's not a whole lot of actual anaerobic digestion manufacturers, anaerobic digesters in the country. There's a big one in Ohio, but North Carolina, which has a lot of manufacturing, could be a place to actually take that. Now, they've got policy problems because they need to make sure the connections are right and all of that. But to be able to convert waste to energy and have actually a manufacturing process to do that is a huge opportunity. In Ohio, the Obama administration had offered money for these regional clusters, a lot of them in energy, and one of them in Youngstown, Ohio, was for digital printing, right, which is obviously an efficient manufacturing process. Ohio could be a lead in 3D printing. And especially since they produce vehicles as well, and there's a lot of suppliers to the industry. So taking advantage of a state's unique asset and then crafting a strategy that would enable people to be employed manufacturing products around that in this sector, to me, is very exciting.
And do you think the states are talking to each other enough about this? I mean, so
no,
often
they don't
in
talk
energy,
to each other.
Right. I mean, there's incredible disparities where you can have these, high-tech batteries replacing gas plants in California, where another state, the utilities are not even considering them.
I shouldn't say that. The Western states, for example, the Western Governors Association is really very much focused on a lot of this. Obviously, California is always taking the lead. But you can't use California as an example necessarily in Alabama. That would be, they would want to do the opposite of that. So you have to respect where a state is and use examples that may be slightly different. So, Alabama would look at Georgia. They might look at what's happening in Tennessee. So there's, Virginia has a huge opportunity with offshore wind. And, you know, why not in a state that makes big products for the defense industry, they could be making big offshore wind turbines as well. I mean, everybody has a unique thing that is an opportunity in this space, but states are competitive with one another. They don't necessarily work well together.
Very interesting. Okay, well, I think with that, let's open it up across the borders of the stage, get some audience questions in, and we
find out where they are. So, questions? Stun the audience. There you go. There's one just here. Again, if you can just say who you are and ask the question.
Brian Azzi, University of Michigan. So
Go blue!
Yep. So we have LIFT in Michigan, like Advanced Manufacturing Institutes. Why don't we have like these initiatives where it's industry and universities and local manufacturers, like bringing people together? Like, but I haven't seen one for clean energy. Like, what would it take to get something like that put together?
Well, I mean, I would come back at you on that. I mean, Next Energy in Michigan is a lot of that in a combination with Wayne State University and some, obviously, the private sector. But you're totally right in that leadership is necessary to bring together an industrial cluster which includes both universities, the private sector, and government to make something happen, and often creating an association from that, right? And so in Michigan, we had what was created, Advanced Energy Economy. I can't remember what they were called. The Michigan, I can't remember the acronym right now, but the bottom line is creating an industry association from something like that, which gathers people of all different kinds of clean energy stripes, which would include the university as well, is a really powerful way to have impact on legislatures. And so if that's not, I mean, I left Michigan, you know, obviously I'm not there anymore, and so I left in 2011, but it's a huge opportunity for the current or the next governor, whoever she is.
Hi, I'm Mary Meaves. I'm with BP Ventures, and I will pass along your suggestion to my family in North Carolina. Congratulations on what you've done in Michigan. I hope you run for office again. But my question is, I mean, I agree that so much happens at the state and local level, but the federal government is essential. And as you just said, the states don't talk to each other. I mean, is there any path to a national clean tech economy that you have thought about or talked about, or any way there, which would be a lot more effective than where we are now?
Yes, there absolutely is. We need a different president, but here, I was saying this to a group last night. Here's my fantasy. I mean, I think that a president, you know, I was saying that this might be done in partnership with the philanthropic community, but ideally what you would want is a president who announces a national strategy that includes a clean energy competition, all of y'all who love competitions. So in the same way that we had Race to the Top for Education, where you had $3.4 billion put on the table, and 48 states changed their standards to be able to just enter the competition. So if you had some amount that, I mean, 3.4 billion on the federal side is like a rounding error. If you put some amount on the table to challenge the states to come to the federal government and say, give us your most robust plan for creating clean energy jobs in your state, taking advantage of your assets and your industrial legacy, et cetera. You would see, and that there's some thresholds. So you've got to have a renewable portfolio standard. You have to have energy efficiency components. You've got to have certain things in order to enter the competition. I am telling you that these governors, who are totally competitive with one another, will, I mean, if you're saying raise your building standards, right? If you could list like 5 things, you've got to do these, and then come back and tell me what more you will do to create jobs, you would see 48, maybe even 50 states now come back to the federal government, go to their legislatures, change their standards and come to the federal government because they would want to have a piece of that to be able to do workforce development training or something in, in this space. So I have a fantasy about that, a race to the top for clean energy, but we need a new president for that. And I'm sorry, you Trumpers out there, but I'm just saying.
No. Hi, Erin Grossi. I'm with Accenture and work in utilities. And as I've gone around different states, here in Illinois or in New York, Boston, I keep locating, legislators or people who are working on creative ways to sort of change energy economics in policy. So allow the utilities to actually get paid back for driving efficiency, for driving distributed energy, for instance. And they're coming up with all different kinds of ways to do that. Unfortunately, I haven't seen yet a good convening body for those people to be thinking about how do they trade stories about what's worked or what the opposition has said and how they've overcome and essentially just share the creativity. And so I wondered, have you located such a convening mechanism, or can you think of one that may be appropriate that we can bring these people together more and sort of share the learnings cross state and cross nation?
Yeah, I mean, other than the industry associations, right? I would say the National Governors Association would be a great place to do something like that, right? That's where we all go. We would all poach each other's ideas. You go into executive session and you'd learn, you'd bring your notebook and just copy. Oh, they did this, and you bring it back for your staff, and they hate you when you come back from those meetings because you've got a list of, a mile long. But that's more general. It's not specific to clean energy. You could easily create, if you had leadership in these, and the National Governors Association often does have leadership in this space. So, for example, when I was governor, when Tim Pawlenty was governor of Minnesota, and he was head of the NGA, before he ran for president, he was really focused on clean energy. That was his thing. And so he had a whole convening of all of the governors who were really interested in this to share best practices about how to break through some of the barriers that are being talked about at the ground level. But you need leadership. It all comes back to politics. It all comes back to putting people in office who can convene and can move policy to break through some of this stuff.
Well, Julian, I think it's probably back to you to finish
All right. Well, I think a lot of food for thought there. Seems like there's a lot of reasons for hope, but we need more communication, more people talking, and events like this where you get people from different states all across the country sharing the best ideas that they have. So it'll be interesting to come back in a couple years, see if any of these ideas are spreading and if the message is succeeding. So let's give a warm round of applause for Governor Granholm. She was excellent.
Thanks, everybody.
And thank you so much. You're a great crowd here.
Julian, thank you. That was great, Ari.